If you're one, some thoughts are too dangerous to think twice. I've always been methodical about my routines. Coffee at 6:15, newspaper folded just so, keys in the same pocket every morning. Order brings peace, or so I told myself. But lately, I've been finding pieces of paper in the most impossible places. And each one carries words I swear I never wrote down. Ring what's real. Maybe you should sign up for the channel's newsletter for new stories. The first note appeared 3 weeks ago, tucked between the pages of my morning paper. Just a single line in handwriting that looked unnervingly familiar. The space between thoughts is where the real you lives. I read it twice, then crumpled it up. Probably fell out of some book, I reasoned. But the paper felt wrong, too thick, too deliberate. The second note was waiting in my coat pocket the next evening. I hadn't worn that coat in months, yet there it was, folded into a perfect square. Memory is just imagination wearing the mask of truth. This time, I couldn't dismiss it so easily. The handwriting was mine. Not similar to mine, actually mine, down to the slight tremor in the G and the way I cross my T's. I started paying attention, then really paying attention. The notes began appearing with increasing frequency, folded inside library books I'd checked out, slipped under my keyboard at work, even taped to the inside of my medicine cabinet. Each one contained thoughts that felt like mine, but refined, distilled into something more pure and unsettling than anything I remembered thinking. We are all just rough drafts of ourselves, endlessly revised by forces we cannot see. The most honest conversations happen between the versions of yourself that never meet. What if consciousness is just the universe taking notes on itself? The handwriting was becoming more confident with each note, as if whoever was writing them was growing more certain of their message. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was that I found myself agreeing with every single word, even when the ideas felt foreign to my usual way of thinking. I decided to test something. I deliberately changed my routine, took different routes to work, avoided my usual haunts. It didn't matter. The notes found me anyway. One was waiting in the glove compartment of my car, which I hadn't opened in weeks. Another appeared in my lunch bag, though I was certain I'd packed it myself that morning. Avoidance is just another pattern, and patterns are how the universe recognizes its own children. That night, I sat down and tried to recreate the handwriting. I pulled out a piece of paper and attempted to copy one of the notes word for word. My hand moved across the page, forming letters that looked right, felt right. But when I finished, the result was different, close but not exact, like trying to forge your own signature from memory. The realization hit me with the weight of cold water. These weren't copies of my handwriting. They were examples of it. Somehow, impossibly, I was writing these notes, but I had no memory of doing so. No conscious awareness of the thoughts they contained. I started leaving blank pieces of paper around my apartment, thinking I might catch myself in the act. Instead, I began finding notes that seemed to respond to my experiment. Observation changes the observed, but what happens when the observer is also the observed? You're looking for yourself in all the wrong places. The you that writes these notes exists in the spaces where consciousness goes dark. The notes were getting longer, more philosophical, almost conversational. It was as if another version of myself, one with access to thoughts and insights I didn't consciously possess, was trying to communicate. But communicate what? I decided to write back. I left a note of my own. Who are you? The next morning, I found it exactly where I'd left it. But underneath, in that same familiar handwriting, was a response. I'm the part of you that thinks while you sleep, that processes while you dream, that sorts through the fragments of your daily experience and tries to make sense of them. I'm not separate from you, I am you, just operating on a different frequency. The conversation continued for days. I would ask questions and responses would appear, sometimes immediately, sometimes after I'd been away from the house for hours. The other me, if that's what it was, seemed to exist in the gaps of my conscious awareness, in the brief moments when my mind wandered, or when I was transitioning between sleep and waking. "How is this possible?" I wrote. "Consciousness isn't as singular as we pretend," came the reply. "We're all multiple selves sharing the same body, the same brain. Most people never notice because the handoffs are seamless. But sometimes, when routines get disrupted or patterns break down, the seams start to show. Are you real? As real as you are. We're fragments of the same thought, experiencing itself from different angles. You think in linear time, moving from moment to moment. I think in layers, accessing memories and ideas that haven't quite surfaced to your conscious mind yet." The notes began appearing in more public places. My office, the coffee shop I frequented, even tucked into books at the library. But only I ever seemed to notice them. I tested this by pointing them out to others, but they would look exactly where I was pointing and see nothing. "They're not for them," explained one note. "They're for you to remember what you've forgotten about thinking." I started to understand that these weren't messages from another person or entity. They were thoughts, my own thoughts, that had somehow achieved a kind of independence. Ideas that had grown tired of waiting for my conscious mind to catch up with them. The philosophical implications were staggering. If consciousness could fragment this way, if thoughts could exist independently of the thinker, then what did that say about the nature of identity? Was I one person with multiple layers of awareness, or multiple persons sharing one body? "Does it matter?" asked a note I found in my jacket pocket. "You've been operating under the assumption that you're a single, unified self for your entire life. But you've never actually experienced this unified self directly. You only experience moments of consciousness, fragments of thought, separated by gaps of sleep, distraction, and forgetting. The unified self is just a story you tell yourself to make sense of the fragments." I realized I'd been approaching this wrong. I'd been trying to solve a mystery when I should have been having a conversation with myself, all versions of myself. That night, I wrote a longer note. "If you're really me, then you know what I'm afraid of. You know why I've built my life around routines and patterns. You know what I'm trying to forget." The response was waiting when I woke up. "I know you're afraid that if you let go of control, even for a moment, you'll lose yourself entirely. But you're losing yourself anyway, just more slowly. The routines aren't protecting you, they're suffocating the parts of you that know how to be alive." For the first time, one of the notes made me cry. I started leaving longer notes, really engaging with this other aspect of myself. We discussed philosophy, memory, the nature of time. The other me had access to connections and insights that felt profound, as if I was talking to a version of myself that had read every book I'd forgotten, remembered every dream I'd lost, and synthesized it all into something approaching wisdom. "You spend so much time being afraid of losing your mind," wrote the other me, "that you never notice when you're losing your soul. What should I do? Stop trying to be one thing. Accept that you're many things. Let the fragments be fragments. Truth doesn't require unity, it requires honesty. The notes continued for several more weeks. But they were changing. The handwriting was becoming less certain, the ideas less coherent. It was as if the distance between my conscious self and this other aspect was growing smaller, the conversation becoming less necessary as I began to integrate these insights into my daily awareness. The last note was different from all the others. Instead of being hidden in some unexpected place, it was waiting on my pillow when I got home from work. Thank you for listening. I don't think I'll need to write anymore. You're remembering how to think in fragments again, how to let thoughts exist without immediately organizing them into stories. That's all I ever wanted. For you to remember that consciousness isn't a single voice speaking, but a chorus of voices learning to harmonize. I haven't found any new notes since then, but I've started to notice something else. Moments when I'll have a thought that feels deeper, more complete than my usual mental chatter. Insights that arrive fully formed, as if they've been developing somewhere outside my conscious awareness and are only now ready to surface. I've come to understand that the notes were never really separate from me. They were me, a version of me that exists in the spaces between conscious thoughts, in the pauses between words, in the gaps between sleeping and waking. We're all more multiple than we pretend to be, all carrying conversations with ourselves that we're not quite aware of having. The fragments of thought aren't broken pieces of some larger whole. They are the whole, experienced one piece at a time. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. Sometimes I still find myself looking for notes in impossible places. But now I understand what I'm really looking for. Those moments when my mind surprises itself, when a thought arrives that feels like it came from somewhere deeper than my everyday consciousness. We think of thinking as something we do, but perhaps it's something that does us. Perhaps consciousness is less like a river flowing in one direction and more like a tide, ebbing and flowing, leaving behind fragments and traces that we discover later, like shells on a beach after the water recedes. If you're wondering what's real, maybe you should sign up for the channel's newsletter for new stories.